you did it. You came back. We're on lesson 2. This time, we are now up to our waist. We are waist deep in intervention. This lesson, we cover grouping, realistic starting point for intervention, and a realistic time frame. Let's get right into it. Lesson 2. Before we can even start grouping, we have to talk screeners. Screeners have 5 main important parts, but 4 that I really want to focus on. They're skill-focused, they're efficient, they're reliable, and they make the student show their thought process. Those are the 4 I really want to focus on. I threw in fair because it matters. We all know that stateside testing that you do, that's like statewide, and the DODEA testing we do over here, that's DODEA wide, we know it's not fair. We know it's written for a middle-class white family. That's not fair. So just make sure your screeners are fair, because you don't know a child's skills if they're not fair. We just don't. Screeners are where the educator can gain an understanding of what skills a student has mastered and what skills the child still needs to master in order to obtain the Tier 1 learning goal. These screeners need to be efficient, reliable, fair, and they need to make the student show their thought process. If the student is not showing their thought process, we cannot see at what skill they are doing incorrectly, what skill they do not understand, what part of the skill they do not understand. They said I did it in my head. No, they did not. Sit them back down and tell them to do it on a piece of paper. Okay? Screeners don't have to be long. It can be a quick 3-question assignment students do before the lesson. Some screeners will have more questions but cover several skills which are used in units and chapters for curriculum instead. This is useful to educators because it allows them to keep going. You take the screener, but it covers units 1, 2, and 3. As long as the screener is reasonable, you can do that. The caveat to this is that we don't want the screener to be too large. Research suggests that an ideal screener is 3 to 10 questions. Screeners that are more than 10 questions can cause stress, anxiety, and fatigue in students, which all result in inaccurate results. Now, realistically, you may not have access to a screener because screeners are not being used like they should be. This is where your specialists come in again. Your math specialist, your reading specialist, those individuals should have screeners because they utilize them to test students to see if intervention would be necessary, which they categorize themselves as intervention, and they are intervention, but there are Tier 3 intervention, and those screeners can be really, really useful to you at Tier 2. Now, let's say for whatever reason, your specialists also don't have screeners. Here's what we can do. Pre-assessments can be utilized as screeners when they are adapted and adjusted to fit the needs. So it's kind of like that a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square situation. A screener is a pre-assessment, but a pre-assessment is not always a screener because, and that highlighted in yellow right there at the top, that skill-focused part. What you do is if you have a screener, or not a screener, if you have a pre-assessment, look at it. Break down the questions. Well, before you should start that, you should start with your Tier 1 learning goal and start layering out all the skills that are necessary for completing that. And then you break down your pre-assessment and you go, okay, this question focuses on this skill, and this question focuses on this skill, and this question aligns with this skill, and it's testing this. And then you go back through, and you really, really don't want to do questions that focus on more than 2 skills at a time, because then we don't know what skill the child is getting incorrect when they get that question incorrect. We can guess, and yes, I said, please make them show their work, but if skill 1 and 2 are where they're faulty, but skill 3 they passed all the way, and the question is asking skills 1, 2, and 3, but 3 is most important, then we don't really know if the child didn't get skill 1 and 2, so we really, really don't want to do that. When you do this, it is a little bit more work, but having a good screener that you utilize as a pre-assessment breaks down what your students do not know how to do. We cannot teach more skills if students are lacking the skills necessary for those new skills, for those more skills. It just doesn't work. Learning is building blocks. If Susie can't add, then Susie can't multiply, because multiplication is repeated addition. So a screener is more beneficial for an educator than a pre-assessment alone because it breaks down what Susie, Johnny, and Carl don't know. Exactly what they don't know and where they don't know it. With utilizing a pre-assessment, you have to ensure that every single skill gets asked. So you may have to add questions on your own. You're going to have to take away questions because I guarantee you on a pre-assessment there are questions that ask no skills. It doesn't test the student's skills at all. It just asks for direct knowledge. That's not helpful to us. It's not. I'm not looking for rote memorization. I'm looking for skills. Every single curriculum guideline that you have to follow requires certain skills in order to meet it. Even rote memorization ones, where like they're vocab words. A child has to understand sounds in order to read. They have to understand phonics. They have to understand grouping. They have to understand long E's and long A's, and they have to understand that an E makes a vowel say its name, but only occasionally, and all of these things in order to read, which means then they can read the vocab word, which means then they can memorize what it means. So, if you're going to go down the pre-assessment route, which is a great starting point because we don't oftentimes get screeners because they're not utilized by gen ed classroom teachers, so they're fewer than I would like, then please break down your pre-assessment to what question is checking what skill and make sure that every question asks no more than 2 skills in it. So that way you can distinguish what skills the child is not getting correctly. Okay? If this isn't making sense right now, I highly recommend that you shoot over to the notes tab on the website and you read the notes. Because like I said, this training is supposed to be sort of brief, kind of quick. We don't want to spend too much time on one thing because I know your time is precious. So I do highly recommend shooting over to the notes tab and it will explain it a little bit more in depth. Okay, so the screener we have now broken down. We understand that we are looking for 1 skill per 1 question, blah, 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 right? For the results, we're going to break down each skill and we're going to correlate those results. So if I have 5 questions about multiplication and I'm checking those skills, I'm saying, does Susie understand the base 10 concept? Does Susie understand repeated addition? Does Susie understand addition? I'm going to break down what one she got wrong and then I know what skills she's missing. Okay? Okay. Now we can group. We can create the groups. Go ahead and read over that really quickly. I'm going to pause and let you do so before I start my spiel, my lecture. It's ironic that I'm lecturing to you because that's exactly what I'm lecturing about not doing. Okay. First, we need to create measurable goals per skill. So we have our targeted learning goal for Tier 1. Now for Tier 2, each skill needs a measurable goal. So that way we know when students are meeting that skill. We know when students have grasped that skill. Okay? We want to do a SMART goal. Always use SMART goals. From here on out, we are SMART goal people. Got it? Cool. Now, I'm going to break your brains because when we group based on intervention, we are not creating below grade level, on grade level, and above grade level groups. We're not. We are grouping based on skill. What skills students are lacking and what skills students have achieved. That's what we are doing. We want the number of groups to be manageable. I don't want you to have 8 groups. I want you to still have groups that are manageable, but I don't want you to be grouping children below grade level, on grade level, and above grade level. That doesn't make sense, because if you have 5 kids that are sitting in your below grade level group that you're doing right now, those 5 kids, can guarantee all know different skills. They're not all missing the same identical skills. Some are missing more than others. Some have no skills in order to meet this standard. Some have the 4th grade skills if they're a 5th grade student, but they don't have 3rd and 2nd, and we can't keep teaching if they don't have 2nd and 3rd, and so you have to group them by skill. And this is where meeting those high achieving students becomes achievable for you as an educator. Did you hear that? This is where meeting with those higher achieving students becomes achievable for you as an educator. Because we are creating groups that I expect you to be meeting with every single day, or at least, every other day. And that includes this group that's not missing any skills. So then they are working on a separate intervention. They are working on an intervention that takes their understanding to a deeper fundamental level of maybe reteaching. They truly say that you don't know something until you can teach it. All right. Give that challenge to these kids. Make it to where they can teach it. Then they know a subject. Then they know a standard. Or are these kids high achieving because they can pass a test? This is where you'll see really where students start to differentiate from each other and those groups that you're so used to having. So we're going to divide them by their skill sets. Now, we can do this a couple of ways. You can divide, let's say a lesson has 5 skills. You could do 5 groups. 5 groups is manageable, especially if you're meeting with them every other day, right? You're not meeting with them every single day, so you meet with 2 groups on Monday, 2 groups or 3 groups the next day, or you do, 3 groups and 2 groups, however it works. It's reasonable. The point where it gets unreasonable is how many kids end up in per group. So sometimes we have to group skills. Our foundational skills that children aren't grasping, those usually are 2 or 3 skills that can go together because they naturally morph in together. So we'll go back to multiplication. I don't know why, but apparently math is where we're going in this lesson, so we're just going to roll with it. In order to do multiplication, you have to know how to add, which means you have to know 1 to 1. And once you know 1 to 1, you have to be able to count. Once you can count, you have to be able to add. And then once you can add, you have to be able to understand base 10. Once you can understand base 10, you can multiply. And that's a short way. You could really break down those skills even more. So understanding 1 to 1 and understanding how to add are usually first, second grade, kinder and first, sometimes second grade standards. Those can all get grouped into one, and those are our students that we consider severely behind in skill set. This is where we also look, what skills can I utilize? Not what skills can I utilize. What skills can I create bridges through the use of manipulatives and tools? Because at the end of the day, you don't have time to go back to teach 1 to 1. You just don't. But you can use counter tools. You can use manipulatives. You can use other things that are at your fingertips to bridge over it. We're creating a bridge to get us to the other skills that we're missing. That's what we're doing. And that's how you look at grouping. We're going to talk more about that kiddo that's falling behind and using manipulatives and stuff, but look at your classroom. Look at the skills that you've divided this Tier 1 goal into, and think about creating manageable, reasonable groups. But do not group them by lower, on grade, and higher achieving students. We don't want that. We want them divided based on skill. A realistic starting point. All right, this goes back to, I could hear you now. I finished that last slide, and I'm sure you were screaming, I'm not meeting with them every other day. I'm not doing this. This isn't realistic. I can't group them by skill. I'm a 7th grade English teacher. They have 85 skills that they need for this standard. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. So let's break it down. We just did the screener. We've looked at what skills students have. We've looked at what they can do. Okay. I'm pausing because I want you to think. Before I even start, how would you solve this problem? If your principal handed you intervention like this tomorrow and said you have to be doing it in classrooms, after reading this slide, what would you do? I'm going to tell you what I would recommend doing. I'm not going to sit here and promise you that it's right, and I'm not going to sit here and promise you that it'll work in every classroom, because I know as an educator that that's not reality. It's not. So here's what I would do. You start figuring out which of those missing skills can be bridged through the use of manipulatives and tools. We're looking at those skills. Let's go to that 7th grade English standard. You've got, 8 skills, right? And one of them is the basics, how to read. We don't have time. By 7th grade, I don't have time. You should be meeting with a specialist. A for real specialist working on that. That's not what my job as a classroom teacher is anymore. It's not. So, audiobooks. They make audiobooks for textbooks now. That's a skill I can bridge through the use of a manipulative and a tool. So that takes that skill away. I don't need to worry about any students who can't do that skill, because I'm going to give everybody audiobooks. Or I'm going to give those students audiobooks, right? Okay? Comprehension is always a skill that can be taught at any grade, but there are certain things about it that you need to focus on at certain grade levels. So you would break it down. You're looking for other tools that you can give students that are severely behind, that can bring them up to a point that makes them manageable in groups. If you have a student that is severely behind, or students, because the reality is you'll probably have one or more now in today's world, you're going back 1 or 2 grade levels, 2 max grade levels, when we're talking about how far back we should start with intervention. Because I know it sounds crazy, but every other skill besides 1 to 2 grade levels behind, you should be able to bridge using manipulatives and or tools. This is going to take some thinking. It's going to take some stretching. It's not easy, but if you meet with your specialists and you meet with even your special education teachers, even if you have no special education kids, they're a great resource for this. Meet with them. Be like, look, Susie can't do A, B, and C, and we're doing groups based on D, E, F. I need her to start at D. What do I do? How can I fill in some of these gaps? We're not filling the gaps with sand. We're creating a bridge to go over. Tier 3 is where they should be filling these gaps with sand, where they should be making a road. We are building the bridge. They are filling us so that the bridge is no longer a bridge. We cannot focus on filling that gap. We can't. The reality is I need them to grasp this. The cool part is that through intervention, you could be working on skill D, E, and F in the classroom, and Tier 3 is working on A, B, C, and by the end of the year, we've created A, B, C, D, E, F. Because you took the time to break it down by skill and work on skill set. And when a child has all the skill sets to meet a goal, they will meet the goal, even if they only receive 10 or 15-minute lessons on it. But the key part here is if you are going back skill set wise, do not go back further than 2 grade levels. It'll be detrimental to the student. That is not your job as a gen ed teacher. Your job as a gen ed teacher is to go back 2 grade level, it's to keep them on grade level, but to go back at most 2 grade levels. So if you are doing division as a 5th grade teacher and your chicken nugget comes in, chicken nugget is what I call students, and I realize I threw that out there because I got myself carried away. Sorry, I'm going to go back to what I was talking about now. If you're doing division, so in 4th grade, they should have learned multiplication. So in 3rd grade, they should have learned repeated addition. You can start with a student that they can't do repeated addition, they can't do multiplication, so therefore they can't do division. We can start on repeated addition and move our way forward. Now, that's going back a lot, and realistically, we may not have the time. So what we can do instead is we can use a multiplication chart as a tool to skip those steps and then strictly work on other skills necessary to complete division and get that student so that they are able to complete the goal. So through the use of a multiplication chart, I can start teaching repeated addition, which they should get through looking at the multiplication chart daily and making similarities out of what the patterns are creating on a multiplication chart. And it honestly will come fairly naturally once they start to notice those. And then I can focus on making sure that they understand base 10 and things like that, so that when they divide, we don't lose them. So I might focus on that student on understanding base 10, but using a multiplication chart, because base 10 is necessary for division, because I'm breaking things into groups, right? And if there's decimals and things that come in later in 5th grade, they need to understand base 10. But I don't really care if Susie knows 6 times 3 is 18. She can look that up on a multiplication chart. But does Susie know that 6 plus 4 equals 10 and that place value changes? I can't. There's not a chart for that. So you see what I mean? We're working with skills that we can, and we're working together to figure out what the student is able to accomplish by the end of the year and what will help you as the educator get them there in a manner that's effective. This is the slide. I know you already read the first line that's making you scream at me. Research suggests that you should utilize an intervention for 3 to 5 weeks. Yeah, I know. I can hear the screaming. I said research. I didn't say that it was realistic. I said research. And remember, all research is the perfect classroom with Susie and Johnny, who are all on grade level. I know it's not realistic. Realistically, it depends on all of the things. Certain grade levels move at a quicker pace than others. I mean, everybody's moving at a fast pace these days. I'm not saying, kinder's moving faster than 5th grade. I'm just saying sometimes certain skills are prolonged across several units in different grade levels. It depends on the child. We all know that you as the classroom educator know the child. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to tell you that Johnny, who sits in the corner and throws a temper tantrum every time it's math, is going to be able to spend 15 minutes on intervention every day for a week and then be able to move on when he threw a temper tantrum for all of intervention. That's not going to work for him. The subject area matters. It matters. Math has way more skills that make up the fundamental skills for math than language arts. Language arts skills branch out further across units and curriculum than math does. Math is very boom, 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 boom. You need to add, you need to subtract, you need to multiply, you need to divide. Then we're adding decimals, then we're adding this. So it depends on what subject area we're working with. It depends on why we are utilizing intervention. Are you utilizing intervention to suggest or recommend that a student in your classroom needs special education services? Because that is a very different path than the educators that's using it just as their new classroom strategy day in and day out. If you are utilizing it to prove that a child requires more services, then you need to make sure you are meeting the guidelines that your school or your district provides. For example, right now in Dodea, you have to show that you've tried something for 3 weeks in order to prove that the child is still not gaining ground academically. So if I'm using an intervention that focuses on multiplication skills, I would have to utilize it with Johnny for 3 weeks. That does mean he's going to fall further behind. I know. But if that's what's necessary in order to prove he needs more services, then that is something that you will have to do. Now, that is very student specific. Johnny may still be doing multiplication interventions when the rest of the class has moved on because it's not realistic. How long are you utilizing the intervention in a day? If you are utilizing the intervention once a day for 20 minutes, then you need to be doing it twice as long than you would be if you were using it twice a day for 20 minutes each, because the intervention needs a fair chance. If you're not utilizing the intervention daily, then you need to be utilizing it for several weeks versus 1 week. But remember, we're focusing on skill. So a lot of the times, for example, if you do math right now in 5th grade in Dodea, their standards are division, and they do 3 units of division. They do standard division last, and they work their way up to it, and then they add division with decimals. All of those skills stay the same, those lessons. So you can be utilizing the interventions for 3 to 5 weeks, depending on how long, your pacing guide is set up for those interventions, because we're focusing on skill. These are not standards. So please, please, please make sure you are thinking about skills, not standards. This final part is where it all takes a turn. The intervention pyramid you are used to seeing is tier 1 at the bottom. It's the thickest part. Tier 2 is the middle, and tier 3 is the top with the smallest. That's not realistic. And that pyramid was created before intervention was truly tried. Intervention and this grouping based on skill set should take up more time than your whole group lesson. Your whole group lesson should be 10 to 15 minutes depending on grade level, and then the rest of that unit lesson time is spent with groups mastering skills. Because, as stated in the last lesson, as stated earlier, if the skills that are necessary to meet the targeted learning goal for Tier 1 are achieved by students, then they will master that, no matter how long the lesson. If they have the skills to do it, they will do it. If they don't, that's where you need 30 to 35-minute lessons. But you don't need if students are grasping the skills that are necessary to complete the lesson. It's a reworking in teaching. It's a reworking in the way you've taught for years. It takes away that lesson lecturing mentality. It does. It's an adjustment. But when intervention is done properly, and intervention Tier 2 takes up the most time in the classroom, it makes a difference in students' achievement levels.